the history of Selenium. And then we have also gone through the Selenium architecture. So architecture for Selenium 3.0 and as well as 4.0, the latest version. And then we try to understand what are the advantages that we have with Selenium and what kind of disadvantages we have with Selenium, right? So now, today, I'm going to discuss with you about our approach or the test automation, right? So the way how we would try to identify the tools and as well as the way how we want to come up with the approach, right? The test approach. So unless until we have the test approach in place, a right test approach in place, so it would be very difficult for us in order to understand like the kind of tools that we want to use and the kind of uh, target that we want to achieve, right? Target or goal, whatever you say, right? So the end goal should be clear enough for us, right? Do you agree on this part? Do you agree?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
somebody said yes. Great. So let's talk in those lines. Okay. So what would be the approach that we take? Okay, let me share my screen. Are you able to see the screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. So now let's talk about first the basic types of testing. So what are the basic types of testing that we have? Let's say it is, sorry, let me draw here. Manual testing. And the other one would be automation testing. Agree on this? So what kind of tools you use when you require manual testing? What is the basic tool that you would use? Probably an end-to-end agile management tool would suffice, like Azure DevOps or Jira or HPLM. Agree on this? Agree? So you need to have some one of these tools which would help you with your test planning, right? So when it comes to the agile methodology, so where do the testing involve? So do you know about the phases of agile? What are the phases of agile? Anyone? What are the phases of agile?
Sprint planning.
Okay. Hmm. Somebody said sprint planning, right? Then development. Do you agree? And then testing, right? And then you would have review, right? And then you would have sprint retrospective, and then you would have your deployments planned, right? And then the maintenance, right? So you would provide the end support for a product. So let's say these are the phases of agile. Sorry. So these are the basic phases of agile. Okay. So where do you think our testing team should involve? Where do you think our testing team should involve?
Planning.
Is it at the testing level or right
In
from the planning?
planning level.
Right? So right
Yes.
from the planning. So along with the team, agile team, when I say agile team, you would get both dev plus QA plus your product owners plus your scrum master, right? This entire team is called a agile team. So now when you start with your planning, that is your requirements gathering and discussion, right? What is that discussion would lead to? Grooming, right? Grooming of the stories, correct? So now during this grooming sessions, so QA also would involve, right, in the discussions and try to understand the requirements, try to identify the scope and try to see the impact within and around areas or the modules, right? So QA has, their involvement at the sprint planning itself. So what they do, they also try to digest the requirements, understand them, and then based upon that, probably some kind of impact analysis we would also do. And the scope of testing is another thing which we would decide, right? Based upon the requirements. Now, based upon the decided scope of testing and the impact analysis that we made, so you would come up with your progression test cases, that is requirement based testing, right? User story testing, rather I can call as user story testing. And based upon the impact analysis, you would come up with your regression scope. Agree on this part? Are you able to follow me? So do you agree this?
Yes.
Great. So now, so this is right from the starting phase of the agile. So QA also would keep involving into the discussions, right? And now once this phase is done and your release is fixed, right, with certain scope or your sprint, right? We are talking about sprint planning. So let's talk in the sprint line itself. So, so when your sprint planning is done, so what you do, you would slowly move the backlog items from the sprint backlog into the board, right? Into the iteration. So now once those were moved into the iteration based upon the priority that is given by the product owner. So what we do, developers would developers would start the implementation, right? And for the testing team, they would start with test planning. That means we come up with manual test cases, high level manual test cases for the requirement, for the user story. correct? So now what we said, so for coming up with this manual test cases, probably we might require some test management tool. If we have a test management tool, that would suffice, right? To create the test cases and also to execute the tests and as well as to raise the bugs and defects. So we would need a test management tool. So we have discussed the various tools, right? So any test management tool would suffice for us. Okay, clear on this part? So now when it comes to testing, so it is not just about the manual testing, right? So what we have, we also have another phase, that is your automation testing, right? So now within this, if you would remember the very first day when we discussed about this various testing phases, at that time probably I might have said that for us within the automation testing, again you have two branches, right? One is the UI automation, the other one would be API automation, and there is one more, that is your mobile automation. Clear on this part? So probably this part, the mobile automation, you can again divide it into UI and APIs. So probably it is not something linear to your UI automation, web UI automation and web API automation. Okay, so this is for web and this is for the mobile. So again, you would have UI and APIs for mobile as well, right? So let's just leave this for now. So we are not exploring this part. But when it comes to your web automation, what is this UI automation and what is this API automation? Anyone? So do we require UI automation or an API automation? If somebody asks you, so what do you say?
Both, you guess.
Okay, somebody said both. Any other guesses? Who said both?
Me, Devanand.
Devanand. Okay, great. Any other
Somebody ping.
guesses?
Thought also the ping, I guess.
Sorry, come again.
Thought also the ping that chart.
Oh, in the chat. Okay, Neil. Okay, so right, both. Okay, so now what is this both? If you have both automation, right, UI and API, then again there could be another question that you would come up with, like how much percentage, right? This should be the next question, right? So when you have UI automation and API automation, at what level you would use API automation, at what level you would use UI automation, and then how much percentage of automation it need to be, percentage of probably coverage, not even coverage, we can, yeah, call it as coverage. So how much percentage of coverage or how much of API automation is required and how much of UI automation is required? So these are the things that we need to decide, right? As an automation tester, we need to analyze and decide this from our side. Do you agree or not? We should be in a position to tell this, correct? If somebody asks, do you go by UI automation or API automation? Then what we would do? We would say like both. Then they have come up with again a question stating that, okay, you would use both. So which one is prominent or which one need to be more coverage and which one should have a less coverage? Nitin, you're trying to say something? I don't hear you. Okay, so let's proceed with this. Let's deep dive into this and then understand what approach we have to take. Okay, so have you ever seen a pyramid, test pyramid? Ever heard about it? The test pyramid?
Yes, UI automation should be less and API automation should be more.
Okay, so what phase it would be? So what this test pyramid suggests? Okay, so let me open a test pyramid. See, test pyramid model in Agile, right? Okay, so if you see this pyramid. So when you see this pyramid from bottom to top, so it narrows down, right? So that represents like how many of, tests or how much coverage we need to place in each of these phases. So what they said, we have unit testing and then the interface testing or the integration testing. Okay, interface testing or integration testing, and then the functional or the system testing, right, at the top. So functional or the system testing, it sits at the top, right? So that denotes like it should be minimal, right? They said it should be minimal amount of focus or our effort should go into functional or the system testing. And the major chunk is with unit testing. So is unit testing part of our SDET activities or is it part of the development activity and dealt by developers?
Development.
Right. So the unit testing is something not in scope of QA. Okay. So developers, they come up with this unit testing. And then we have interface testing or the integration testing. So this is the phase where you would have APIs. Okay, let me copy this image onto here. Right. So now, if you see here, this one, the interface. So this is nothing but your API testing. Again, API testing can be both manual and automation, through automation. Anything is possible, right? So your more focus would be at the interface or the integration testing, where you would test your APIs prominently. So while testing the APIs, usually what are the key factors that we test? Probably the error codes like 200, 500, 400, right? These error codes, and then the response data based upon request data sent, right? Usually this is something which we do. Along with this, if you have come up with your UI functional flow coverage, using APIs, right? The first two, they are independent and individual things, right? Like just a single API would take, and then you would trigger with some data in case if that requires certain data, and then it would come up with some error code, the response code. I can say as response code, the response code and the response data, and you can evaluate it. Okay. So this is independently at each of the API level. This would work. And this part is something like the UI functional flows, the functional testing that you wanted to come up with, right? This functional or the system testing, instead of having more number of test cases at the UI level, the same flow, if you have automated using the APIs, multiple APIs, right? Involved in one of the functional flows, right? Every functional flow would involve multiple API calls. So if you can consolidate those calls, and then if you can come up with your UI functional flow using the APIs and then test that flow using the APIs at the interface level, right? At the interface level. So what is that? Your backend is secured. When I say my backend is secured, that means when the UI is deployed, I am left out only with UI testing, not the functional testing, right? Just the UI testing. That means my form, my display of that form, how the what we say, like the colors that it need to display, and probably the kind of what we say font that it need to display, the size of the font it need to display. So and the values that it need to display if it is a drop down. So or if it is a button functionality, so the action that particular button need to do. So those are the ones which we need to test. Do you agree? Agree on this? Because you have already verified your functional flows using APIs. So now you no need to again rework with entire functional flows, right? Just one end-to-end scenario, covering all the pages. Like you can traverse through each of the pages, load the page, verify whether the page is loading, verify whether the elements are loading on the page, the required elements, and then verify whether the data is being loaded into the fields, form fields, and then do the necessary action to navigate to the next page. So if you can verify just those kind, that kind of flow, end-to-end flow, navigating through each and every page, that should suffice for me, right? I don't need to again re-verify all the scenarios specifically, right? So let's say I have a drop down for country, right? For country. So for the country field, which I need to select in one of the form on a web page. So I have a drop down which showcase list of around 190 countries. Okay. So now if I need to, for example, test for all these 190 countries selection. So if I go by UI, it's obvious that it would take more time. Do you agree? So I need to navigate to that page. Page need to be loaded. And then within that, this country field, form field should be loaded. And within the drop down, I need to click the drop down, read all the values, and then select the desired country that I wanted to select, right? I need to click on it, and then it will get selected. Again, I need to verify whether the value that I have selected, so whether that has been added to the specific property of that particular element or not. This is the verification that is involved for this country field, right? And I need to repeat the steps for selection of 190 different countries, right? It would take lots of time, correct? So in the similar way, for coming up with each of these functional flows and verify with n number of data, it might take more time. Rather, what we can do, we can go by UI functional flows coverage using APIs, test them such that my backend is secured. And for me, it would be only one end-to-end test scenario that I would run for one single data. That's all enough. Rather than going with 190 tests, 190 countries here to test at the UI side, I would just test with one country. Let's say India. With India, I would test my end-to-end scenario, right? And this UI functional flows, which were automated using APIs, right? So here I would test for 190 countries of data. Are you getting this? This is the approach that we have taken just based upon this test pyramid. So test pyramid itself suggests it. Like if you want your efforts to be saved, if you want low maintenance of your code, and if you want to have more coverage, and if you want to bring in more automation into the project, so do follow this test pyramid model, right? So in that, we are involved at interface level testing and the functional or the system testing. That's all. So unit testing is not in our scope. So we don't worry about it right now, right? Our worry is only about interface testing and the functional or the system testing. So let's say I have my entire API coverage, the functional flows coverage, and I run this. So now there is no bug, at the UI functional flows that have been run using APIs, right? And let's say when I am trying to select the country, right, other than India, probably there is some error. It is not being selected properly in the country field. And then it is always taking value India, right? For even though if I am selecting some other country, so it is still going as India. The value is going as India. Okay. It's assuming it. Okay. So now you tell me like where we need to focus on. Is it at the UI side or the API side? Did you get the question? So I tested this scenario of selecting 190 countries from the API side, and there is no bug at all, right? And then when I'm trying to test it with UI, so for my scenario, it is, we identified that from the UI, every time whenever I try to change the data, so let's say this time I have executed it with India, and for the next release, I have changed this data, and I would come up with selecting England. Even though I selected England to test, so still it is considering India, and then it is taking India and submitting it, right, from the US side. So now I need to raise a bug, right? So if at all I need to raise a bug, so who is the responsible developer who need to look into it? Is it UI side or the API side?
US side.
UI developer, right? You
Yes.
no need to even just go and reach to the backend developers, because your backend already you know it. Like based upon your functional flows that are being tested here, there is no bug at all. So it's only about UI part. So there is some issue that rests with the UI, right? Clearly we know it because you already have your API tests which were running properly and there is no issue at all, no failures at all based upon the coverage that we have given. And then we are confident enough that our backend is working properly. So there is no pretending for the developer, like even the UI developer, stating that probably the full stack developer or the backend developer should look into this issue and try to get me the details, blah 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 stuff, right? Correct? Nobody can deviate you, right? Correct? They cannot. They cannot just simply, blabber anything, right? Utter anything. So you have the proofs. You have the proofs that your API is secure. So it is UI. So please take care and fix at the UI side is what we would definitely can ask. Right? Clear on this? So this is the test approach usually we take at the project level. Clear? So we follow this testing pyramid model. If you are not following this, if you are not following this, then if you're not following this kind of approach, and if you are more concentrating on the UI, so it is obvious that the primary focus that you have on UI would lead to what? So what is our automation goal? Automation goal itself, end goal itself is to save the efforts, right? Our end goal is to save efforts. So if you are just quietly focusing on the UI and you are keep on adding as many UI tests as possible, then very first thing is UI tests are prone for failures. Whenever there are changes in your UI, it's obvious that these are prone to failure, more prone to failures, right? Or unstable. That means it requires maintenance, right? We need to keep updating our objects. Keep updating objects. Correct? So now when you keep updating your objects in the long term, if you are concentrating more into UI tests, more UI tests, that means more maintenance. Correct? No? More UI tests, more maintenance it would be. So now let's say like you are testing the login functionality. For testing the login functionality, it takes probably uh, it's not writing up. Probably 2 hours per login functionality manually. And through automation, usually it takes probably half an hour, that is 30 minutes. Let's assume it. Okay. So using the automation, if you have a good working code, so probably it takes 30 minutes to cover all these scenarios and execute them. Okay. And manually it is taking 2 hours. So now what happens when you have more UI tests, right? So you have, I mean, whatever login functionality test cases are there, you try to automate everything, like 100% coverage you try to give. And as well as all those were automated using UI. So now what happens? You have more tests, no? So what happens? Ultimately, there was a change with respect to the fields that we have on the login page. Okay. So somehow they have removed the password field. Now there is no password field, or they have changed the name of the password field. So what happens now? You need to again update your scripts, right? So now, if at all your functionality, I just assumed it as login functionality, but it can be any functionality. If at all it is not that stable, and the developers are keep changing this, what we say, like the elements, right, that are being displayed on the page. So every time for the maintenance, that is for to update your uh, script, so it might take, let's say, like 1 hour, right? So this 1 hour is a maintenance task, right? Maintenance of the script. So you need to update it properly such that you can able to execute within 30 minutes. So now whenever there is a change, every time you might require this 1 hour, no? So if at all it is like this, right? So whenever you are increasing your maintenance work of the script to just achieve this return of investment of 30 minutes, in the long term, probably this doesn't reap much results, right? Our main goal itself is to save our efforts. Rather than saving the efforts, you might be keeping more efforts into the maintenance task. I have seen lots of projects which get into this loophole because they have more manual test cases, and then they would feel like, okay, I might require 3 to 4 estate resources who need to keep maintaining this existing scripts, and then again two more resources who need to keep developing the scripts for the new test cases, and probably test execution also need to take place through uh, what is that, Azure pipeline or any other pipelines, CI/CD. So this would be our usual thought process. Though you have that CI/CD in place, though you have your scripts in place, so if at all your maintenance is high, so day by day, if it is increasing, then your suit is not that worth, right? It won't save much efforts for us, correct? In the long term. So that is where we come up with a test pyramid approach. Clear on this part? Are we clear?
Yes.
So it is very much important as a estate resource to understand the API testing and as well as the UI testing, right? If at all you are an automation tester, you need to understand both. You need to learn both. So you would be called as a full stack tester, right? What is this full stack tester mean? So you would able to do the API automation, you would be able to do the UI automation, you would be able to work on performance testing using Jmeter or Kubernetes, K6 or any other performance tools, right? So that's when you would be a full stack tester, right? Just like full stack developer. So people started calling like SDETs. Within that, again, the people who have prior experience on various areas of testing, so they started calling them as full stack testers, right? Clear on this part? Clear on this concept? Any questions? Yes? No? Okay, great. So now what I would do is I would share a document in WhatsApp group that is related to the installation. Okay. So it's related to the Visual Studio installation. So people can download the Visual Studio community version 2022, and then you can proceed following those steps and install the Visual Studio and keep it ready for tomorrow. Yeah. I guess probably tomorrow there may not be a class or session. So I will check and confirm on that part. But from Monday, probably we would have continuous sessions. So yeah, so by that time, so just keep this Visual Studio community version. It's free. Community version 2022. Download it, and then I would provide the document today. Follow the document, and you can install the Visual Studio. Clear on it? Are we good? Okay, Neil has already installed it. Great. That's good to hear. So probably rest of the people can also download and install it. Clear on it?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, so I'll stop it here today. Yeah, thank you, Tim.
Thank you.